So let's see, culture. Russian culture, and kind of I've touched it a little bit, I guess, but is they're very loyal to the people they know and love, and they're helpful to strangers, but they also don't really go out of their way to converse with them necessarily. There's just some cultural things that people need to get used to. They don't smile unless they're around people they love and they're genuinely happy. Any other smile is considered being fake. And I actually really admire that. I think we probably smile too much here in America. And so they don't really smile in photographs at all, ever. Some of the youth maybe are getting there now, but even if it's a really happy day, even wedding days, sometimes it's just that's about it. They're really so kind when you get to know them and love them. If they love you and they know that you are just a trustworthy person, I mean, they'll do anything for you. They won't have food and they'll feed you, which is crazy. And it's just they're really generous, really giving of what they have. There is, I guess in reality, there's a lot of alcoholism in Russia. And so that definitely has its effects on the culture. There's a lot of families that have really struggled with alcoholism, and that damages a lot of people, but I don't know, there's also a lot of really cool miracles experiences with people overcoming that kind of stuff, just as there is anywhere. So that's cool. And I guess another, just to touch lightly on food, I guess, because that's a really big part of their culture, is they pretty much eat the same kinds of foods. Borscht, it's Russian beet soup, and it's delicious, and I make it to this day with my wife at home. She loves it. And that's just really good. They also eat lots of little breaded rolls, or they take bread and they either stuff meat in it or potatoes in it or jam in it, and it can be dessert or your meal or whatever. They have all sorts of pies. Same thing. You could have a breakfast pie. You could have a full meat pie. It's kind of interesting. And they love fish, but we actually weren't really supposed to eat fish over there. Sometimes it's radioactive still from Chernobyl and things like that. But they love fish. So their culture is just, I don't know, it's kind of cool. It depends on where you are. In the big cities, it's a little more closed off. Again, the walls on the streets, the houses, people keep to themselves a little more. You get on a public bus, and in America, you would expect there to be chatter, noise everywhere, on a bus, because everyone's talking on a phone or to their neighbor. In Russia, you get on a bus, and it's silent. And everyone sits there in their seat like this until they get where they're going, and then they get off. And if you're the missionary on the bus talking to somebody, everybody hears it and knows it. And that could be a great thing, and probably most of the time is a great thing. Sometimes we had to be careful. We didn't go up crazy on buses in terms of contacting. We sat by a person, had a friendly conversation, led it to the gospel if we could. But we didn't jump seats, and that sometimes could get us into trouble. So, but it was great. I'm trying to think. The language is a huge part of their culture, obviously, and what I love most about it is how rich a language it is. And what I mean by that is they have more words than we do. They have words that explain emotions that we don't have words to explain. That makes sense. So with that said, it's pretty difficult language. The grammar is really difficult. The language around is difficult. With that said, there were times on my mission where people, they would eventually ask if my companion or something was American or me, and then I would say, oh yeah, we're both American, and then they didn't believe me. They actually thought I was Russian. They're like, no. I can tell by his accent that he's kind of American, but you're Russian for sure. You have to show me your passport or I won't believe you're American. So it's hard, but you can learn it really well if you want to. And so I guess the language is beautiful, actually. We're really used to it. I think in America we kind of have that stereotype that it's maybe really harsh. And not to bash on Germans, but even Russians think German is harsh, like way too harsh. So Russian language is really pretty, actually, when you know it and are around it a lot. I don't know. It's not very harsh at all. And sometimes it sounds like they're yelling at each other, but I think that's part of the culture, is they actually are yelling at each other a lot. But it's not a mean yelling. It's like, that's how they converse. They just like, this is exactly what I want to say. This is exactly what I want to say. Okay, done. We kind of in America mince words and walk on eggshells all the time, but they're really blunt. They're just like, this is how I feel and what I want to say, and done. And so it's actually really like it. This is a funny nuance, but in America, when you're on the phone, you say, okay, all right, well, I'll talk to you later. Yeah, okay, thanks. See ya, bye. You say, there's like 4 byes in there. Talk to you later, see ya, bye, In Russia, it's just like, bye. And sometimes you're really like, whoa, why'd you hang up on me so fast? But it wasn't really that fast. It was just 1 bye.
In terms of some cultural differences, I remember before I went to Russia, I had this idea of Russians being very cold or stern, not very friendly. And in some respects, that's probably true, especially in public. If you don't know someone and you greet them in public, they get caught off guard. They're not sure what to think. You go up to someone, "Здравствуйте, как у вас дела?" and they're taken back, like, do I know you? Because normally you don't greet someone that you don't know. It's got to be a formal introduction process before you can greet someone in public. But for those that you do know, and for those that you go inside of their homes, they're some of the most loving, hospitable people you'll ever meet. I just think of the families that we taught and the families that were members of the church that we were in their homes, and they're very very kind, very friendly, very hospitable. They would offer us anything that they had to eat. Chai, which is just tea, and pechenye, which is just like crackers or cookies, anything that they could offer us to have something to eat while we were a guest in their home. And I think that's a side of Russians that a lot of people who haven't been there don't really see or truly understand. They know how to have fun. A lot of people not in the right ways, but for the members, they have fun cultural things. It seems like in Russia, we laugh as American missionaries that it seems like they have a holiday for almost every single day of the year. And the joke is that it's just a reason for everyone to drink. Vodka and alcohol is a very big thing in Russia. And so anyway, all these праздники, all these holidays are a reason for them to drink. But it's also just reasons to get together with family and friends and to celebrate whatever it is, whether it's Flower Day or Pancake Day or all the random days that they have. It's they look for opportunities to celebrate, and that was something that I thought was unique and that I enjoyed. Sometimes I think it probably got a little bit, oh, it's another holiday, a little bit monotonous, but for the most part, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really neat.
Russians are very, very traditionally minded. It only has been recently, with the improvements in technology and whatnot, that Russian has become a little more westernized, where the younger generations are acting a little more like Americans and Europeans. But Russians, you'll see that in their culture, a lot of things seem very underdeveloped or primitive, or kind of 18th, 19th century American stuff. And it's because they are so founded on their traditions, the traditions of their culture, the traditions of their family, and whatnot. They don't want to differ from what they've seen, and they have been through some very, very rough times. Russia has been around for thousands of years longer than the United States, and so have seen many, many more hardships and trials than we have. They have been through wars that we could never imagine on their own territory. And so the people, when the American media depicts Russians very improperly. They depict them as these really gruff, angry drunks and whatnot that we see, but they come off that way right from the beginning, or on the surface, because of the hardships they've been through. They have had to have developed hard skins in order to survive and progress in through the communistic era and whatnot that they have been through. But you'll find that Russians they seem like they don't smile, but I kind of like to view Russians as like a chocolate covered bunny. Like they have that hard outer shell, but are just the most loyal, loving, best friends you'll ever have on the inside. If you can get a Russian to trust you and to call you friend, that honor is far greater than being called a friend in America. In America, you'll call a person that you just met on Facebook your friend. But in Russia, if I call you my friend, it means I would bleed and die for you. You are more important to me than family, because family you're stuck with, friends you get to choose. And they are absolutely loyal in every sense of the word. They will do anything for you. They will smile, they'll laugh, they'll sing and dance with you. They're so loving and open if you can get them to trust you. They are very, very honest, and blunt. That's just their culture. It's not offensive. If I had a bad haircut, a Russian would tell me, be like, "Man, your hair looks ugly," and they didn't mean it offensively. They're just stating the fact. So as an American, you will find that we're very sugar-coated, and you can't take what they say offensively. And the language is based very much so that in Russian, if you translate the Russian directly to English, it sounds very rude. If I was going to ask you to hand me the salt and pepper at the dinner table in English, I would say, would you please hand me the salt and pepper? But in Russian, you would say, give me the salt and pepper, in a flat tone, and that is completely polite. And so that is something to brace yourself for, that when Russians are honest, they're not rude, they are just honest. They're going to tell you to your face how they feel and what they think of you. So you always know where you stand with them. Russians, like with that honesty that they have, that bluntness that they'll give to you, they can see right through you. They don't want you to brown nose and sugarcoat back to them. If you are fake with a Russian, if you honestly, genuinely don't care about them, or say, we want to come help you, fix whatever in your house, and you really don't mean it, you're just hoping they deny you, they will see right through that. You need to have genuine love and honesty for the people. And if you don't, you can't suggest something that you're not willing to do. You can't give a compliment that they haven't earned. You don't say thank you for something until the task is completed. You don't say thank you. When you see the food, you don't say, wow, thank you so much, this food looks good. And they'll turn to you and look and say, you haven't even tried it yet. Why are you thanking me? You need to be yourself. You need to be straightforward and honest, and they will respect that. You will learn to respect, or they will come to respect you so much more if you have that honesty that they treasure so much and that they give back to you.
One thing with Russia, I'd never had herbal tea before in my life. I just never been big on that. But Russians, they drink tea a lot. You hear about British people drinking tea a lot, and Russians are the exact same way. Every day when you go over to somebody's house, they're going to want to give you tea. And we would never have dinner appointments with people, but anytime that we would visit with somebody in their house, literally almost every time they would offer you tea and either cookies or bread or apples or something. They're very generous with their food. They're very generous with what they want to give you. And it is pretty rude to turn it down. You have to, with discretion, kind of work around situations like that. But our mission president said, it was like mission rule that herbal tea was all right. So you would just learn what kinds of tea were okay and what kinds were word of wisdom bad. And the members, they would drink this kind of allowed teas that the area presidency that had told them, isn't in contrast with the word of wisdom. And it's still a huge part of their culture. And partly just because it's so cold. And when you come inside, you need something warm and you need a warm drink to heat you up. But that's definitely when you go to somebody's house, you take off your boots and you take off your coat in their entryway, and then they sit you down and they feed you. They try to give you food. Lots of times, I mean, I don't know about everywhere in Russia, but in my mission, it was really customary to bring something to people's houses. And so we would usually stop by a small store on our way to visiting somebody and grab like some tea cookies, just like a small package of cheap kind of cookie things. And it was kind of our way of saying, like, if you're going to feed us, we're going to give you some food back for it. And people really appreciated that. Cookies in general, baked cookies were a really good way to get into doors of like less actives. Be like, we bought American cookies for you, we made it, or brownies, and they would kind of melt. It was great. It was to the point where, like, if we had a backup plan that had fallen through, we'd think, well, we could go buy this less active. Oh, but we didn't make cookies. We can't get over there though. But I mean, you could just go by yourself, but it's this really great way, and the entire mission used it to get into doors. Russians love it. But so one etiquette thing is just the food. They just give and give and give. They give you as much as they possibly can. It's great. Another thing, in Russia, it's bad. I guess it's taboo to shake hands through a door. And usually women, like men, don't try to shake hands with women. If a woman extends her hand, the man can shake it. But if a man usually doesn't go to shake hands with a woman. They kind of respect the distance from women. But it was great when you're tracting, because somebody would open the door and you would go to shake their hand, and either they had to let you in or they had to come out. And so I would sometimes use that as kind of a way to like get them to talk to me more, or like either come out to speak to us or like invite us indoors, because they'd be like, oh, come, all right, come on. Like, what do you want? And so that was cool. Men are very traditional in their treatment of women in Russia, Russian men at least. There are different people like who come from Middle Asia or from different places like that, and they're slightly different. But Russian men are really traditional with women. They would get mad at me if I tried to put chairs up in the church, or if I tried to set out chairs. Like, what are you doing, sisters? Sisters? No. Sisters don't do this. Come on. Or they would always want to open the doors for you. They'd always want to do things for you. On buses, they would give up their seats for you sometimes. They're really respectful of their elderly. They have this like great kind of tradition like that. This great kind of old-fashioned, I guess, tradition, especially with women, that they're really respectful. Even the men that didn't like us as missionaries, or that, didn't like what we were saying, as sisters, they would be nicer to us than as elders. Elders could, had the potential of getting punched or something, or, would get sworn at, would get horrible things said to them. Sisters, they were much milder with us. And so I think that was a blessing. You didn't have as much like negative reactions to you as sisters, because the men were really, really respectful of women. I never had any bad experiences with men, except for when they were drunk. But you can get out of those situations pretty quick. So that was really good. Russians have this great, this like social understanding of like what it is to be good to other people, and they're not overly happy or kind, or they don't go out of their way to be just like, oh, I've just met you on the bus, let me make you feel as comfortable as possible. They're very closed and reserved, but they're also very appropriate, and they don't do things to hurt other people for no reason. I mean, they're careful with their emotions, and they're careful with how they treat people, so that's really great.
So culture over there is super unique, because just like you said, you have 4 different cultures you're dealing with over there, especially when you're a Russian speaker. Because as a Russian speaker, I spent time in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, all 3 of them. And I spent ample time in each of them, at least 6 months in each country. And so saying that, you have to deal with all those cultures, and, Lithuanian and Latvian culture are a little similar, but they still have major differences. And Estonian culture is very different than Latvian and Lithuanian. And Russian culture is different from all of them. And so you have all these really unique cultures you have to deal with. Now, as a Russian speaker, obviously you're going to focus on the Russian culture in the Baltics. And it's a very prideful one. It's super interesting because they're living in the Baltics, But talking to them, you wouldn't know it. You'd think they're still living back in Mother Russia because, to them, Russia is the best. It's the highest standard of anything, and it's the best country in the world, and Russia is the most amazing thing that could have happened to Earth. And if you don't understand that, then you're wrong. So, according to Russians in the Baltics. And so it's really hard for them to get along with the native people there as well. It's a unique situation because, a lot of these Russian peoples, their families didn't originate there in the Baltics. Yeah. Their families didn't originate there in the Baltics. What happened was when the Soviet Union took over the Baltic states, they deported a lot of the native population, so a lot of the native Estonians, Lithuanians, Latvians, and then imported a lot of Russians to more Russianize the populations there. And, sometimes there'd be specialists from different parts of the Soviet Union, and they would all move there just as what the Union needed, Like I know in Estonia, there's a lot of Ukrainians there. There's a lot of Ukrainian construction workers who built a lot of buildings in Estonia. And now that the Soviet Union has fallen, though, they're still living there, but they no longer have that Russian type government to identify with. And there's a lot of prejudice actually against the Russian peoples living in the Baltics. People like Estonians, Latvians, Lithuanians. I'm not going to say all of them because some of them do get along very well with Russians, but a lot of them have this really resentment towards Russian people because of the way they were oppressed by the Russian government when the Soviet Union was there. So the Soviet Union preached to, we're all equal, we're all one, but that wasn't the case. They favored Russians way more than any other people. And they in fact persecuted and deported a lot of Estonians, Lithuanians, and Latvians. And so now that that government has fallen, and now that the government is run by actual native Baltic peoples, the Russians there are heavily, well, I wouldn't say heavily, but they are persecuted in a lot of ways. They're withheld a lot of jobs. A lot of times Russians have to do like the lower kind of class jobs and stuff like that. I just remember a couple instances where people told me, if you're going up for a job against, let's just say you're in Lithuania, you go up against a Lithuanian candidate. A lot of times the employer won't even look at your resume, he'll just look at your last name. And if you have a Russian last name and he has a Lithuanian last name, guess who he's going to pick? The Lithuanian guy. And again, that's not the case everywhere there, not all the time. But from a lot of people we talked to, that seemed to be the sentiment there. And also another problem was, the Russians living there, again, they were so prideful about their home country and their home culture, which, is good. It's good to take pride, obviously, in where you come from. But the problem was it got in the way of them adapting and, integrating with peoples that were of the Baltics. And so you have these two very distinct cultures, the culture of people in the Baltics and the Russian pride culture, and they clash. They don't mix at all. And they both hate each other because one hates the other. The Baltic culture hates the Russian culture because they felt like they were so oppressed by Russians for so long under the Soviet Union. And the Russian culture hates them because they're not Russia and because they feel persecuted right now. And so you have to understand that going in. There were a lot of times I only spoke Russian. I didn't speak Lithuanian or Latvian or Estonian. And I'd be contacting on the streets and I'd see a Latvian man and I knew most Latvians spoke Russian anyways, so I'd try to contact him, and they would get super offended, and they would yell at me and get angry, and they'd be like, why are you talking to me in Russian? I'm a Latvian, and I'm proud of it. We're no longer oppressed by those people, And they had some choice words, for him and stuff, and I was just like, I'm just a missionary, I'm not involved in this, but, going in, you have to understand those kind of cultural differences and go along with that. And it's hard because you want to be there for everyone. You want to help all people. And, but as a Russian speaker, you are there mainly to teach the Russians, and you have to understand that. And you kind of have to make a choice that you want to be really involved in that culture, and less with the others. Obviously it's good to make friends with everyone there. And there were so many like Latvians and Estonians and Lithuanians that I loved while I was there. And they were great people, amazing people, but being a Russian speaker, my job, my calling was to focus on those people. Russian cuisine is interesting. There's some parts of it that aren't too different from ours. It's very bland though. So if you're used to tons of Mexican food or, spicy Asian food, you're going to be kind of disappointed because a lot of our meals were just boiled potatoes and dill and or just cuts of meat with a little bit of salt. And I mean, that's what they eat, and they love it. And you just gotta kind of be prepared for that. But the borscht is to die for. Ukrainian borscht is incredible, and it's really good hot. If they can't, sometimes they'll serve it to you cold. But if you can get it to serve it to you hot, so it's beet soup, which I know a lot of people are like, ew, beets, but it's got lots of good stuff in there. And believe me, on a cold Baltic winter day, you want some good hot borscht, and you just want to gulp it down, and it will warm your body and soul. So try to get involved with as much cultural activities as you can. We had the cool privilege to go to a wedding, like a Russian style wedding, while we were there, and they had it in our branch building, so it was funny. But they got to do all these cool Russian traditions, and if you just really immerse yourself in that, you're going to have so much more fun. I saw some missionaries who were, I don't know, they just didn't really take well to the culture, and they still wanted to be like American, and which is great, but I just feel like you're never going to forget how to be American. So why not take this opportunity to like really delve into a culture that's not your own, and really like learn to love it, and love the food and the cool celebrations, the parties they have. And again, the wedding was so much fun. There was all this fun stuff they did. Like they'd yell, kiss, kiss, kiss as loud as you can, like every like 5 minutes, and like for the bride and groom to kiss. It was hilarious. And so we'd always Gorka, Gorka every time. So just immerse yourself in that kind of stuff. If there's ever opportunity to go to a traditional Russian event, or if you can make a church activity into like a cultural Russian event and get the members involved, that is the coolest thing ever. Always try to get involved in that stuff, because it's just going to make your mission so much more fun, and you can come on with cool stories and like cool traditions and recipes that other people don't have, and you can share it with people here, and it's just super fun. So
they're not cold, but they're not as open as Americans are. So it's very weird for somebody to walk up to them and say, "Hi, how are you?" Because that's not what they do. Like in the Soviet time, if somebody said that, that means they want your personal information to get money from you. And so the Russians, they've just become used to not talking to people because they don't want things taken from them. And so if you try and talk to a lot of the older people, they'll look at you weird and say, "Why are you talking to me?" But the younger people, they're a little more open, and they'll want to talk to you, especially if you're an American, because they like Americans, the younger people. So that's something to know about, is that it's hard for them to open up. But when they do, they're super nice. I heard that the Russians are compared to a pineapple, where on the outside, they're very spiky and hard, and they don't look appealing, but then on the inside, they're sweet and they're nice. They love holidays there, especially they have a lot of church holidays. An interesting thing is that they celebrate Christmas on January 7th, I think. It's the first week of January. And they actually put up their Christmas tree and hand out presents on New Year's Eve. So they celebrate New Year's Eve more than Christmas. Christmas is more spiritual. And so you would see people going to church and lighting their candles. They would go to the Russian Orthodox Church and light their candles and say their prayers. And then New Year's Eve is more about the parties and the giving gifts and everything. A big holiday there is called Victory Day, and that is May 9th. And Victory Day is the day that Russia ended, or when the World War II ended for Russia on May 9th. And so they just party all day, and they hand out ribbons. They're orange and black ribbons. I actually have a couple, and they just hand them out for free. And they have parades, and they just celebrate the day that they gained victory. They also have something called Women's Day, and that is March 8th, I think. And that's just a day that they celebrate women. And so we got flowers on the streets, and people, they just respect women. And I really liked that, because I feel like in Russia, they understand the role of men and women. They understand that the role of the woman is to be a mother and to be at home, take care of the kids. and to support the family. And the husband is supposed to be out working. And I like how they understand that and they make sure that everybody knows that. They also have a day for fathers. It's not really Father's Day. It's more of a day for men, but if you directly translate the holiday, it's Father's Day. And so, yeah, that's just a day where they celebrate their fathers, they celebrate their grandfathers that fought in the war. And like I said, they have a lot of religious holidays. So they'll have a holiday for every saint in the Russian Orthodox Church. I don't know all of them, but I just remember on the street sometimes people would say, "Oh, you don't know about this holiday? It's like Saint Olga's holiday." And I'm like, no, we don't know. But yeah, they have a lot of those holidays. They love icons. They have, in the Russian Orthodox Church, they have icons. And so if you go into a Russian house, you'll see icons in the corner. And that's what they pray to, is these icons. And if you ever go to visit a monastery or a Russian temple, you need to make sure, at least for the woman, you have to cover your hair. In our mission, we were able to go see these temples as long as we took off our name tag and as long as there wasn't a, we call it a sacrament meeting, but I don't know what they call it. Like, as long as there's, as long as there's not a mass or a meeting going on, then we can go and see the church or the temple, as long as we respect their traditions by covering our hair and wearing long skirts.
The people that I got to know on my mission there's a fabulous people. In my mission, they're a little more closed off usually. It's not common cultures go up to somebody you don't know and say hi and start talking to them. It's a little weird. You only talk to people you know or have business with or something like that. So it's kind of strange as missionaries would go up to somebody and say, "Hi, how's it going?" And they'd look at us and be like, "Do I know you?" And it's like, "No, but we're missionaries and we want to get to know you." And there's like, "Yeah, I don't really have time for that." But as soon as you kind of break that shell, you get in and they get to know you a little bit, or you get an appointment at their house for a lesson, they just open up, and they're the most giving and loving and hospitable people ever. I like to say that they're like watermelon. They're hard up on the outside, but you crack them open and they're soft and sweet on the inside, and they love to just give. So I mean, at first you kind of think like, this is like hard, these are scary people or whatever, but as soon as you get to know someone, there's the warmest people you'll ever meet in your life. But so it is a little bit weird culturally to be a missionary, because you just cold contact people, and for them that's a little bit kind of different and shocking, but they get over it and it's fine. But we kind of try to find different ways of talking to people. We have English classes and smoking programs, quit smoking, because pretty much everybody smokes in my mission, at least. So I mean, we kind of come up with creative ways to do it. The religion is primarily Russian Orthodox. It's kind of like Catholicism in a lot of areas, where it's more tradition than actual faith. People might not go to church, but they hold firm to the fact that they are Russian Orthodox. That's how they were born. It's very embedded in their culture as a nation and as a people. And it's a beautiful culture, and it's something you kind of learn about and get used to, and it really helps define them a lot. Along with that, you also have some really amazing Russian authors and thinkers that have come to shape who the Russian people are. Pushkin basically mastered the Russian language and made it what it is. So if you've got time before your mission, I'd say look at Pushkin and Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and just any of the Russian writers, because they're amazing. They have some incredible works, and you can really see kind of the soul of the people through the Russian authors. So I'd encourage you to do that, to get to know the people. A lot of people would work in sort of factories. So the first area I served in is Togliatti, is the city's name. That's Italian. It's some Italian guy's name, but it's in Russia, I promise. And I loved it. It's a beautiful city. It used to be just like this tiny little town, but then a car factory opened up, car manufacturing factory called Lada. It's a Russian car brand. Opened up there, and the city just boomed. So there are 3 areas of Togliatti. One's called Old City, and that's kind of like the central where it used to be. You've got Komsomolski, which is like a little area on the river, and then you have Avtozavodski, which means car factory, or they also call it New City sometimes, and that's kind of the newer area, which kind of exploded since the car factory opened. So you get a lot of people working in factories and stuff like that, and then just anything you can imagine. You got hair salons and grocery stores, and I mean, it's just like any other big city really, is what most of the cities you serve in are going to be like. So.
In wintertime, like when you shake people's hands, like Russians don't mind shaking hands with people. Like that's just kind of a common thing. We do just like in here. But Russians are very obsessed about cleanliness. So for example, in the wintertime, when you go and shake somebody's hand, even if it's -40 outside, which it often is in the winter, they won't shake your hand with their gloves on. They will take off their gloves and then shake your hand, and then put their hands back in the gloves. Because that's just rude. You don't shake hands with your gloves. Your gloves are dirty. Your gloves have been touching, the dirt, your clothes. But your hands are clean. So they'll do that. If their hands are dirty, instead of shaking hands with you, they'll like touch your elbow. They'll make you grab like their forearm type of thing. You have to make sure that you're using the proper form of you. There's the polite form and then like the informal form. And so you always should be using polite form where you're talking to people like that you don't know, especially older people. Russians, when you're doing tracting, they have 2 doors in their apartments. They have a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch thick steel door, and then they have a regular wood door behind it. So when you knock on the door, they will open up the wood door, but they won't open up the steel door. And then they'll ask, who is it? And then you have to try and yell through a steel door, who it is, what you're doing. Same thing as that Russians don't have houses. They have the apartment buildings. In order to get in, they have the electronic door codes. So what you have to do is you have to dial in an apartment, and you call them, and then you're talking through this little, like machine on the door, and they have to let you in, and then you can go up and, knock on their apartment or other people's apartments. And in terms of do's and don'ts, another cultural thing, Russians, when they talk, they're very close. You get very, very close to each other. They don't have a concept really of personal bubble. So like you will be almost nose to nose to people sometimes when you're talking to them on the street, and that's just fine. That's just how they are. They don't like talking from distances. They will get really up in your face as they talk.
Ukrainian and Russian culture are very, very, very similar. I mean, there's a few foods that Ukrainians eat more of than Russians, but they grow up watching the same cartoons. They read the same authors. They're very, it's pretty similar, especially Eastern Ukraine. The further east you travel in Ukraine, the more Russian it becomes. And so there's people, like on my mission, there would be people when you're talking to people on the street and buying something, they would tell you the price, and they would say like 2 rubles instead of 2 hryvnia, because they would, even just say like using the Russian word for like the Russian currency, just because like they're very Russian. So it's culturally, they are almost identical in many ways. So whether it's you're going to Ukraine or Russia or Belarus, you're gonna pretty much run into the same things and find the same culture. And I think that's pretty general across many Soviet countries, just since they were one country for so long, that it kind of, just the way of doing things kind of bled. And they, as in the Soviet Union, many foods from the other native people kind of became popular, like plov, which is a rice dish from Uzbekistan, is very popular throughout all of Russia and Ukraine now, just because when Uzbekistan, as it was part of the Soviet Union, it kind of spread. So it's kind of, I think there's more of like a Soviet culture, so more so than like a specific Russian or Ukrainian culture, and they've all kind of influenced each other. Russia and Ukraine have always had a long relationship. Even like Ukraine was part of the Russian Empire, and it's kind of gone back and forth. Like in the last 500 years, pretty much Ukraine has been attacked and been controlled by like every single one of its neighbors. Like it was part of the Polish Empire, it was part of the Lithuanian Empire, it was part of the Russian Empire, and then spurts of it being a free country in between all of those things. And so it's always kind of been the show where it's very close and intermingled because they are Eastern Slavs, just like the Russians and the Belarusians and Belarus. And so they've always had a very close relationship. And I mean, just like any political thing, there's people who are for what's going on and think it's a good change. There's people who are against it. But at least, I mean, I recently returned. I spent the entire summer in Moscow. So I was in Russia, and I didn't feel any political tensions there as an American. I went to the Crimea this summer, and for all I know, I may have been the only American in the entire peninsula at the time. I don't know, but and there were I didn't, even though that had just switched and they'd just switched over from using the hryvnia, which is the Ukrainian currency, to the ruble, which is the Russian currency, and all those things, and transitioning from being a part of Ukraine to being part of Russia, there wasn't any political tension there as well. So it's in the day-to-day life for many people, things haven't really changed. For others, I mean, they've really been struggling a lot and really suffering. I know I have some friends who, they weren't able to talk to their family for 6 months because they were completely cut off, or they were sitting in their apartment and their building got shot up, kind of thing. And so it is a very real thing. Like all political things, people have different opinions on it, whether it's good, whether it's bad. But the members of the church have been very, very good about not worrying about who's right and who's wrong, but just really taking people in and taking, members who are fleeing as refugees from the war zone to, take them in and make sure that everyone is taken care of and helping people. So it's really focusing just on the safety of the people rather than, who's right and who's wrong, and just that'll eventually sort itself out one way or the other. But I think it's really hard without being there to even really know what's going on. Just because I think, with, news outlets kind of spin things the way they want it to be said. So if you watch the Russian news or the Ukrainian news and the American news, you'll get three very different stories. And so I think it's really hard to know what's actually kind of really the truth of what's going on.
My MTC teacher used this analogy. She is Russian and she was from my mission. But just for Russians, a lot of people just kind of see him as kind of grumpy, really mean, straightforward. And to be honest, they kind of are. But she said she compared them to coconuts. They're really hard and not so pretty on the outside, but you get to the inside and they're just flowing with sweetness and goodness. They might have nothing, but they'll still try to give you the coat off of their back. If when they consider you a friend, they would do anything for you. And so it really was so beautiful. I was so humbled to come into people's little one-room apartments, and they would still offer me some of their food even though they didn't have very much. Just they're very hospitable, and once you get into that inner circle, they're very, very loving, very kind. Although sometimes, as a cultural difference, they like to argue, or their tone of voice is harsher. The way they ask questions kind of even sounds rude in an American perspective. But you get used to it, you learn about it, and sometimes you even actually end up adopting it a little bit. In one of my last areas, I had a pretty new companion. She just finished training and I think another transfer. And I hadn't realized this, but I had let some of these Russian conversational demographics maybe slip into my language. So sometimes I'd be like, do you have the phone? Or just asking questions like that, or come here, do this, very command form. And she's like, you can say please and thank you. And in my head, it just didn't even connect that it could be seen as rude. I'd kind of adopted that culture into my own mannerisms. And so for a little bit, I was trying to readjust, and I'd say something and be like, go get that. And then I'd be like, please. Or just I'd have to remember about the different culture and remember that, you don't always have to be so direct or loud when asking for someone to do something. And so it was a little bit interesting to see that. But really, for like Russians, they don't really take things personally. Like they're very argumentative. They love to discuss things out and kind of have that like pressure, maybe just kind of like jazzing you a little bit, like seeing where it'll go. But I don't know, after a while you become accustomed to it and you realize when they're joking or just that they're very involved in this conversation. Like my first Sunday, I thought everyone in the Relief Society wanted to kill each other. But really they were just so passionate about what they were talking about. And Joseph Smith, he saw God. Like they just get so into it. They're just so passionate when they speak. It's really cool and then sometimes frightening at the same time. But I love it. In normal life, you don't usually talk with everyone. You kind of associate with people who are similar to you. But on the mission, it's important to realize that like you kind of feel like everybody's crazy because you talk to everybody and you do find everyone. Whereas like before you just didn't really realize that they were out there, like because there kind of are crazy people everywhere. But so many times you'll just see so many like little funny things. You're like, wait, is this really happening right now? And for everyone, it's just kind of like normal. Like one time I was sitting on a bus and I was flipping through my planner, trying to figure out what we were doing next and how we were going to get there. And then everything's pretty quiet. And then some girls come in onto the bus completely just like covered in foam. Like there maybe have been like a foam dance party or something and they were just kind of like giggling and laughing just like on the bus and everyone just kind of like looked and then looked away. And then I don't know what happened, if that just like triggered something, but then this old grandma, this babushka, just like stands up and starts like singing. Just like singing out loud and like laughing and like talking to people, where she was like totally fine and normal before that. She just gets up and like just like starts singing and there's like little handrails and she like kind of like grabs it and like swings from one rail to the other to like the front of the bus and is like singing and like talking to everyone and then just like pays the bus driver and then gets off. But like the whole time everyone had just kind of was, you know, like on their iPhones or whatever, like doing something. They kind of like look at her and then she like just like watch her leave and they're like, and just kind of like go back to their stuff. Like Russians are so unfazed, like the most bizarre things will happen and they're just like, oh well, okay. You know, just like, yeah, I love the babushki, the little old ladies. They're usually so spunky and they just wear kind of weird clothes and will be selling you berries on the street and calling you little pet names, little cutesy names like Lapachka, which means like little paw, but like it's a term of endearment. There's like, oh, Lapachka. And it's just, you'll see a lot of funny things with babushki, and there's a lot of stray animals, a lot of stray cats, and usually the babushki will take care of all the cats in the neighborhood. They'll go out and give their little fish scraps or feed them something, even if it's like oatmeal, which I wouldn't think of cats eating oatmeal, but I guess if you're a starving homeless cat, I mean, oatmeal's pretty great. They also take care of all the gardens outside, and you can get some really just beautiful gardens. And if you're going tracting, just be aware that not everyone will be fully clothed. Kind of a Russian rule, you get home and you don't really need a lot of clothes on, so there's some pretty funny, interesting things that happen there with tracting. Tracting is probably where I saw the most interesting things. As I'm sure is pretty common to most missions.
religion is a big traditional cultural thing there. A lot of people are pravoslavny or Russian Orthodox, and many people would, they would die for their religion over there, for the Russian Orthodox Church, even though they may not be super church-going people. They may not go all the time, but because, their fathers and their grandfathers and grandmothers were Russian Orthodox, that's what they believe in. And it's something that I think has helped make them who they are. And Russian people are really good. They have a tradition, and I think a stereotype that's probably very true for being heavy drinkers and drinking vodka a lot. But they're very good people. And once you get to know a Russian, they will be really good friends with you, and they'll really look out for you and take care of you. Once you can show them that you really care about them, then they'll be your best friend forever. And I think that's awesome.
One of my cities I served in, they were more polite. Like, if you were to cross the street, like, for sure your car would hit you in St. Petersburg. Like, I mean, they're on their way, you get in their way, you're gone. But in this other city, I mean, they would stop and let you go by and, like, be really polite. And that was a huge contrast from what I was used to in St. Petersburg. And this other city was like a 9-hour night ride on a train away. So it was, like, pretty far away from St. Petersburg, different flavor of people.